Imagine a world without geniuses. No one to invent light bulbs, compose symphonies, or scribble mind-bending equations on dusty blackboards. Pretty dark, right? Literally dark, since without them, we'd still be fumbling around with candles. A genius isn't just someone who scores high on an IQ test. They're the rare fireworks in human history who light up the night sky with ideas so dazzling that the rest of us spend centuries staring upward in awe. They come in all shapes: messy-haired physicists who bend time, reclusive painters who doodle flying machines, philosophers who annoy entire cities by asking too many questions, and even dreamers who think machines can do math for us. The beauty of these minds is that they don't just solve problems, they create whole new ones, and in the process, push humanity into unexpected directions. As we step into this journey, think of it less like a history lesson and more like a backstage tour of the world's weirdest, brightest rock stars of the brain. And trust me, once you've met them, you'll never look at an apple falling from a tree or a smile painted on a canvas quite the same way again. After our opening fireworks, it's time to meet the Renaissance rock star himself, Leonardo da Vinci. Forget the dusty museum vibe for a moment. Leonardo was less a painter hiding in his studio and more a creative tornado disguised as a human. His brush turned wood panels into eternal mysteries. Just ask Mona Lisa, who's been smirking at humanity for 500 years and still won't tell us why. And then there's The Last Supper, a wall painting so dramatic it makes modern soap operas look tame. Leonardo didn't just paint people, he painted secrets, puzzles, and emotions so layered that art historians are still playing detective centuries later. What's more fun is imagining him multitasking, one hand adjusting pigments, the other sketching some flying contraption in the corner. His studio must have looked less like a workspace and more like the set of a mad scientist sitcom. So when we talk about Leonardo the painter, we're not just talking about pretty pictures. We're talking about coded smiles, theatrical dining scenes, and a guy who made even silence on canvas feel louder than a drum solo. If Leonardo's paintbrush was his magic wand, then his notebooks were basically time machines. Inside them, you won't just find doodles. You'll find a Renaissance Netflix catalog of flying machines, war tanks, and even creepy studies of muscles and bones. Imagine him holding up a sketch of a helicopter-like contraption and saying, "Don't worry, it'll totally work," in about 400 years. His tank design looks like a medieval turtle on steroids, while his anatomy drawings are so detailed that modern doctors still nod in approval. The funny part? Most of these designs never got built, partly because 15th century Italy didn't exactly have the tech, and partly because Leonardo kept getting distracted by, well, everything. One moment he's calculating gear ratios, the next he's fascinated by how birds flap their wings. It's like having the world's smartest friend who promises to help you move house, but ends up inventing a jetpack instead. These inventions remind us that genius isn't just about creating what works today. It's about imagining what could work tomorrow, even if tomorrow takes half a millennium to arrive. By now you've seen Leonardo the painter and Leonardo the inventor. But here comes the ultimate twist. He was both at the same time and more. He wasn't satisfied with being good at one thing. He wanted to be the Renaissance equivalent of a multi-tool. Picture him painting Mona Lisa with one hand, while the other casually sketches a human skull, and his brain is busy calculating how a bird's wing creates lift. That's Leonardo, an artist with the heart of a scientist and a scientist with the soul of an artist. He believed beauty was hidden in patterns, whether in a smile, in a flower, or in the geometry of a spiral seashell. To him, nature wasn't just inspiration, it was a giant textbook waiting to be annotated with doodles. What makes him the perfect Renaissance icon is this refusal to draw a line between art and science. For Leonardo, they were dance partners in the same performance, one leading, one following, constantly switching roles. And that's why today we don't just call him a painter or a scientist. We call him the universal genius, the man who made curiosity itself look stylish. Just when the world thought physics was neatly tied up with Newton's laws, in walks Albert Einstein like the guest who flips the entire dinner table. His theory of relativity didn't just tweak the rules, it rewrote the manual. Suddenly, space and time weren't fixed backdrops, but a stretchy fabric that could bend, twist, and warp like a cosmic trampoline. Gravity wasn't some invisible force pulling apples down. It was the very curve of space itself saying, "Come here, buddy." Imagine how unsettling that was. Centuries of certainty shattered by a man with wild hair and a habit of daydreaming during his day job at the patent office. Even crazier, his math suggested time could run slower if you move fast enough. So yes, technically, your GPS and your sci-fi movies both owe him big. Relativity wasn't just science. It was a cosmic prank, a reminder that the universe plays by rules stranger than any of us could invent. And the best part? Einstein managed to make it all sound like the simplest idea in the world. Just a little bending of space and time, nothing to worry about. After shaking the universe with relativity, Einstein could have strutted around like a rock star. Instead, he looked more like the absent-minded professor who forgot where he left his socks. His trademark? That shock of unruly hair that seemed to defy both gravity and combs, paired with a grin that made even the scariest equations look friendly. He didn't care for fancy clothes or formalities. He often walked to work without socks, as if fashion was just another theory he wasn't buying into. But beneath the playful quirks was a humility that charmed everyone. He once joked that he had no special talents, only passionate curiosity. A modesty so convincing that you almost forgot he bent space and time for a living. Colleagues admired his warmth, students adored his humor, and the public saw him as proof that brilliance didn't require a stiff collar. In a century of stiff politics and world wars, Einstein's laughter and humility were as revolutionary as his equations. He showed us that you could change physics forever and still look like a kindly grandpa who might hand you candy along with a lesson on the cosmos. Einstein's legacy didn't end with chalk dust on blackboards. It leapt straight into our daily lives. His famous equation, ER-MC2, wasn't just a clever scribble. It cracked open the secrets of nuclear energy. Unfortunately, that meant humanity got both clean power plants and some very scary mushroom clouds. Einstein himself was uneasy about how his ideas were used, but history rarely asked for permission slips. Beyond the atom, his relativity theory became the silent guardian of modern technology. Take GPS. Without Einstein's corrections for time dilation, your phone would think you're standing in the middle of the ocean while you're actually just trying to find the nearest coffee shop. From nuclear medicine saving lives to satellites guiding your Uber, Einstein's fingerprints are everywhere. And here's the playful irony. The man who once joked about having no special talent ended up building the invisible skeleton of the modern world. So next time your GPS politely tells you to turn left, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the wild-haired genius who bent space and time so you wouldn't get lost on your way to brunch. Every great discovery needs a good origin story, and Newton's involves the most famous fruit in history. Picture young Isaac sitting under a tree minding his own business when bonk, an apple crashes onto his head. Now, did it actually hit him? Historians argue, but let's not ruin a good story. What matters is that instead of cursing the apple and making pie, Newton wondered, why did it fall straight down, not sideways, not upwards? That tiny everyday moment turned into one of the biggest brainwaves in science. He realized that the same force pulling the apple to Earth also keeps the moon dancing around us, like a cosmic yo-yo. Suddenly, gravity wasn't just about clumsy fruit. It was a universal glue holding the heavens together. Imagine the shock. Centuries of mystical explanations about planets replaced by the thought that it's all just one simple law. Newton didn't just see an apple fall, he saw the universe obeying rules. And with that, humanity's relationship with the cosmos changed forever. One apple, one question, one genius. Once Newton had his apple-inspired epiphany, he didn't stop at gravity. He decided to write the instruction manual for the universe. The result? His 3 laws of motion, the golden rules that explain why balls roll, rockets launch, and why you fall off a chair if you lean too far back. The first law says objects love to keep doing what they're doing, which is basically the universe's way of saying, don't bother me unless you absolutely have to. The second law connects force, mass, and acceleration in a neat formula that every physics student both loves and dreads. And the third law? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So next time you stub your toe on a table leg, just remember, technically, the table hit you back. These principles didn't just tidy up mechanics. They gave humanity the blueprint for building bridges, sending rockets to space, and designing roller coasters that don't throw riders into orbit. Newton turned the chaos of motion into a symphony of predictable rules, and in doing so, handed us the keys to the physical world. For all his brilliance, Newton wasn't exactly the life of the party. In fact, if there had been a competition for most introverted genius, he'd have won hands down. He was the kind of man who would rather lock himself in his study for days than chat over a pint at the tavern. His reclusive habits earned him a reputation as a solitary thinker, but that solitude was fertile ground for some of the most influential ideas in science. Between bouts of silence, he churned out theories that reshaped physics, astronomy, and even mathematics with the invention of calculus. Yes, that thing students still grumble about. The irony is delicious. The man who avoided people ended up influencing nearly every person on the planet, whether they realize it or not. From how bridges stand, to how rockets fly, to how planets orbit, Newton's fingerprints are everywhere. He may not have been the friendliest neighbor, but his legacy is a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices echo the loudest across history. So while his social calendar was empty, his calendar of scientific breakthroughs was absolutely packed. Enter Nikola Tesla, the man who turned electricity from a parlor trick into the lifeblood of the modern world. While Edison was busy promoting his direct current like a pushy salesman, Tesla was quietly sketching out alternating current, the system that would eventually power everything from your bedside lamp to the skyscrapers of New York. AC was clever because it could travel long distances without fizzling out, unlike DC, which tired out like a sprinter after a short dash. Tesla's vision transformed cities into glittering wonderlands, replacing candlelit gloom with electric brilliance. Imagine the first time people saw whole streets illuminated. It was like humanity had stolen fire from the gods again, only this time with less singed eyebrows. Of course, the war of currents with Edison made the story juicier. Edison staged stunts electrocuting animals to prove AC was dangerous, while Tesla calmly powered entire fairs to show it was safe. Spoiler alert, Tesla's side won. Thanks to him, our modern lives hum to the rhythm of alternating current, a system so seamless we barely notice it, but without it, we'd still be stuck in the dark. If Tesla's alternating current lit up the world, his other inventions made him look like a wizard auditioning for science fiction. He dreamed of wireless energy transmission, electricity leaping through the air without a single wire, like lightning on command. In his lab, Tesla would calmly stand among crackling bolts of electricity taller than himself, while visitors tried not to faint. Then there was his infamous death ray, which he claimed could bring down armies or make wars obsolete. Spoiler, nobody ever saw it in action, but just the idea made governments both intrigued and slightly terrified. And let's not forget his experiments with radio signals and remote control, which were so far ahead that people thought he was summoning ghosts. Tesla's inventions danced on the line between genius and "are you sure that's safe?" What made him special wasn't just the gadgets, but the way he imagined a future where energy flowed freely, without limits or wires. Some of his ideas never left the drawing board, but many became the seeds of technologies we still rely on today. For all his dazzling experiments and lightning theatrics, Nikola Tesla's life ended on a quieter, lonelier note. He was celebrated as a visionary, yet often forgotten when the spotlight moved on. While his ideas lit up cities, Tesla himself spent his final years in a modest New York hotel room, feeding pigeons and scribbling new inventions that never left his notebooks. He was the kind of genius who could imagine powering the entire planet, but sometimes struggled to power his own bank account. History has a bittersweet sense of humor. Edison became a household name, while Tesla turned into the cult hero of science nerds and comic book fans. Today, however, his legacy has surged back like one of his electric arcs. Tesla coils light up science fairs, and even a car company borrowed his name to signal futuristic innovation. He may have been a solitary figure, equal parts magician and scientist, but his vision was never truly lost. In fact, every time we plug in a device, Somewhere in that hum of electricity, Tesla is still whispering, "Told you so." Step aside, gentlemen of science. Marie Curie just walked into the lab with a determination strong enough to split atoms, almost literally. Alongside her husband Pierre, she poked around mysterious chunks of pitchblende and, instead of finding boring old rocks, she uncovered two brand new elements, polonium and radium. Polonium, named after her beloved homeland Poland, and radium, which glowed like it had a nightlife of its own. Imagine the scene. Marie stirring cauldrons of chemicals in a drafty, shed-turned laboratory, while neighbors whispered, "Are they brewing soup or a superweapon?" With patience that would outlast even the most stubborn equation, she distilled tons of ore just to scrape out a few pinches of glowing matter. And here's the kicker. While most scientists of her time were busy arguing in tweed jackets, Curie was busy rewriting textbooks. Her discovery didn't just add new entries to the periodic table, it cracked open the door to the atomic age. In one brilliant glowing scoop, she showed the world that curiosity, and maybe a dash of radioactivity, could change everything. Marie Curie didn't just wrestle with radioactive rocks, she also wrestled with the even heavier weight of society's expectations. At a time when women in science were often treated like they had stumbled into the wrong classroom, Marie marched in and built her own syllabus. She wasn't just the first woman to win a Nobel Prize. She doubled down and won two in two different fields, while some of her male colleagues were still trying to remember how to spell polonium. Yet her path wasn't lined with applause. Universities doubted her, committees underestimated her, and gossip columns whispered about whether she belonged in a lab at all. Instead of backing down, she strapped on her lab apron like armor and kept stirring those glowing beakers. Her stubborn brilliance proved that curiosity doesn't care about gender. In fact, she shattered stereotypes so thoroughly that she turned into a role model for every woman who ever picked up a microscope. Marie's story isn't just about discovery, it's about defiance. A reminder that the laws of physics bend for no one, and neither should ambition. Marie Curie's discoveries didn't just sit on dusty shelves. They spilled out into hospitals, battlefields, and power plants. Her glowing elements became the backbone of new medical treatments, helping doctors zap tumors with radiation and giving patients a fighting chance. During World War I, she personally outfitted mobile X-ray units, driving around like the ultimate science superhero, scanning soldiers' broken bones right at the front. Talk about hands-on work. But Curie's legacy didn't stop at medicine. Her breakthroughs planted the seeds for nuclear energy, a force that could either light up cities or scare them half to death, depending on who held the switch. It's a strange paradox. The same woman who saved lives also unlocked the genie of atomic power. Today, every time a doctor wheels in a radiation machine or a city runs on nuclear power, it's Curie's fingerprint on the button. Her story reminds us that science is never just about equations. It's about choices, consequences, and the courage to use discovery for good. In the end, Curie proved that a single spark of curiosity can light up the whole world, literally. Galileo didn't invent the telescope, but he definitely gave it a career upgrade. Before him, it was basically a toy for nosy merchants spying on ships. In Galileo's hands, it became the ultimate cosmic detective tool. One clear night, he pointed it toward Jupiter and nearly fell off his chair. 4 tiny dots were dancing around the planet. At first, he thought his lens was dirty, but night after night, those dots kept orbiting. Boom! Moons of Jupiter. It was like finding out the universe had backstage passes, and Galileo was the first to sneak in. This discovery was more than just a cool astronomy fact. It was a slap in the face to the idea that everything revolved around Earth. Suddenly, the heavens were less about perfect divine order and more about messy orbits that didn't care what philosophers thought. Imagine the excitement and the dread when Galileo realized he had evidence that the old geocentric model was on shaky ground. With a simple tube of glass and curiosity, he showed humanity that the universe was way bigger and weirder than anyone expected. After spotting Jupiter's moons dancing around their planet, Galileo realized he had evidence that the Earth wasn't the center of everything, and nothing ruins a cozy worldview faster than proof. He championed the heliocentric model. Yes, the sun in the middle, Earth doing laps like everyone else. But this was 17th century Italy, and suggesting the Earth moved was like telling the Pope his map app had a bug. Galileo's writings spread fast, and soon he had admirers cheering him on and critics sharpening their theological knives. The church summoned him, and what followed was less of a debate and more of a cosmic courtroom drama. Imagine Galileo, gray beard bristling, arguing, "But look through the telescope," while his opponents replied, "We don't need to. We have scripture." The verdict? He was forced to recant, muttering the legendary, "And yet it moves under his breath," like the sassiest footnote in history. Galileo's standoff wasn't just about planets. It was about daring to trust your eyes over tradition. He might have been silenced, but his telescope had already shouted loudly enough to shake the heavens. Even after the courtroom drama, Galileo's biggest legacy wasn't his quarrel with the church. It was the way he turned science into a hands-on sport. Instead of nodding along with Aristotle's ancient lectures, Galileo dropped balls off towers, rolled them down ramps, and basically turned Pisa into the world's first physics playground. He discovered that objects fall at the same rate regardless of weight, which must have been awkward news for anyone who thought heavy rocks had special privileges. His experiments with inclined planes showed that motion could be measured, predicted, and, most importantly, tested instead of just guessed. This simple idea that knowledge should come from observation and experiment became the backbone of modern science. He swapped philosophical armchair debates for actual data, making him the father of experimental science. Imagine Galileo in today's world. He'd be the guy turning his garage into a lab, uploading slow-motion apple drop videos to YouTube and saying, "See? Told you so." In the end, Galileo didn't just look at the stars, he changed the way humans look at everything. Charles Darwin's adventure began not in a lab, but on the deck of a ship, the HMS Beagle. Picture a young Darwin, seasick half the time, yet scribbling furiously in his notebook the other half. The Beagle's voyage around the world was like the ultimate field trip, only with fewer lunch breaks and a lot more iguanas. When he reached the Galapagos Islands, it was like stumbling into nature's experimental kitchen. Giant tortoises plodded about as if time moved slower for them, and finches sported beaks so oddly shaped they looked like they'd been designed by a committee. Darwin realized that these quirky variations weren't random. They were survival hacks, customized for each island's buffet of food sources. Instead of seeing fixed species carved in stone, Darwin began to see a grand, ongoing remix of life. The idea was still fuzzy then, but the seeds of evolution had been planted in his notebook. And just like that, the seasick young naturalist became the accidental DJ of biology, spinning tracks from finch beaks and tortoise shells into the opening beats of a revolutionary theory. Back from the Galapagos with a notebook full of strange birds and giant tortoises, Darwin began connecting the dots, and what he drew was a picture that made the world gasp. His theory of evolution by natural selection was simple, yet mind-blowing. Life wasn't a static museum exhibit, but a constant remix, with nature as the DJ. Species didn't stay the same forever. They adapted, competed, and the best-suited survived. Suddenly, humans weren't the crown jewels placed delicately in creation. They were players in the same survival game as finches and iguanas. For Victorian society, this was the intellectual equivalent of someone yanking the rug out from under the drawing room. Priests frowned, scientists debated, and the public whispered, "Wait, are we cousins with monkeys?" Darwin himself wasn't a firebrand. He wrote carefully as if dropping a bomb, but wrapping it in polite English prose. Yet the shockwave was unstoppable. The theory didn't just challenge how people saw animals, it redefined how humanity saw itself, not as rulers of nature, but as its restless, evolving children. Darwin's theory didn't just stay tucked away in biology textbooks, it spilled into every corner of science and even society. In biology, it became the compass guiding everything from genetics to ecology. Suddenly, scientists could explain why giraffes stretch their necks sky high and why beetles had enough varieties to start their own fashion week. But outside the lab, things got messy. Some thinkers twisted survival of the fittest into excuses for ruthless politics or cutthroat economics. As if Darwin had written a manual for boardrooms and battlefields. Spoiler, he hadn't. Meanwhile, artists, writers, and philosophers grabbed his ideas to reimagine humanity's place in the grand story of life. Whether adored or attacked, Darwin's work forced everyone to rethink who we are and where we came from. And that's the funny part. One man's seasick scribbles from a long boat ride ended up shaking the foundations of biology, ethics, and even how we tell stories about ourselves. Evolution wasn't just about finches, it was about redefining the human family album with some very surprising relatives. Long before textbooks and TED Talks, there was Confucius, a man with wisdom sharp enough to cut through the chaos of the spring and autumn period. Born into a time when feudal states squabbled like kids fighting over toys, Confucius didn't pick up a sword. He picked up ideas. He believed order could be restored not by force, but by teaching people how to live with virtue, respect, and a healthy sense of manners. Imagine him strolling through courts of bickering rulers, calmly dropping lines like fortune cookies. The superior man is modest in speech, but exceeds in action. While lords plotted wars, he plotted ethics. Though his career as an official was a bit of a flop, he was often ignored or politely shown the door. His travels turned him into a wandering teacher, gathering disciples like a rock band on tour. They carried his lessons across China, and slowly the man once dismissed by politicians became the moral compass of a civilization. Confucius's life was proof that sometimes the biggest revolutions begin not with armies, but with a teacher and a chalkboard of timeless ideas. Confucius didn't build armies or empires. He built ideas. His philosophy revolved around three simple but powerful principles: Ren, benevolence; Li, ritual propriety; and Yi, righteousness. Together, they were like the ancient Chinese version of Wi-Fi, connecting people and keeping society from crashing. Ren was about compassion, reminding rulers not to treat citizens like disposable chopsticks. Li was about manners and respect, from bowing properly to not double-dipping at banquets. Yi was about doing the right thing, even when it wasn't convenient, because true honor doesn't come with shortcuts. These weren't just abstract concepts. They reshaped how families, governments, and communities behaved. Imagine Confucius as the world's first life coach, teaching kings how not to be jerks and reminding common folks that kindness was contagious. Over time, his principles became the software running beneath East Asian culture, influencing everything from imperial exams to how children greeted their parents. In short, while others fought for power with swords, Confucius armed humanity with ethics, and it turned out to be a far sharper weapon. Confucius may have left the world more than 2 millennia ago, but his voice still echoes like a timeless ringtone nobody dares to silence. His Analects became the handbook for emperors, scholars, and even nervous students cramming for imperial exams. For centuries, his ideas shaped laws, schools, family traditions, and even how people greeted each other at the dinner table. Think of him as the ultimate influencer, except instead of hashtags, he had maxims like, "Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself." From China to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, his philosophy became the cultural software that kept whole societies running. And here's the twist. While dynasties rose and fell like dominoes, Confucius's teachings only grew stronger, quietly advising rulers and guiding generations. Today, whether in boardrooms quoting leadership books or classrooms teaching respect, bits of his wisdom still slip into everyday life. His legacy proves that sometimes the sharpest sword isn't steel, but an idea, that a teacher with words sharper than weapons can outlast empires. If philosophy were a giant buffet, Aristotle would be the guy piling his plate with everything on the table. While most thinkers focused on one or two specialties, Aristotle built an entire encyclopedia out of sheer curiosity. Logic, he wrote the rulebook. Ethics, he mapped out how to live a virtuous life without turning into a monk. Natural science, he cataloged animals like an ancient Pokemon trainer, scribbling notes on everything from sea cucumbers to lions. Politics, rhetoric, metaphysics. If it existed, Aristotle had an opinion on it. He didn't just dabble, he built systems, turning messy questions into organized frameworks. Imagine him in today's world, the professor who teaches philosophy in the morning, biology at noon, and political science in the evening. then still finds time to mentor a young Alexander the Great after dinner. His mind wasn't just wide, it was deep, weaving connections across disciplines. In an age where knowledge was scattered, Aristotle pulled it together into something like the operating system of Western thought. He wasn't just curious, he was the original multitasker of wisdom. Aristotle's influence didn't stop at the edge of ancient Greece. It stretched across continents and centuries like an intellectual Wi-Fi signal. Medieval scholars in Europe devoured his works, often calling him simply the philosopher, as if no other thinkers even deserved a name. His logic shaped theology, his ethics influenced politics, and his natural philosophy became the skeleton upon which science tried to hang its muscles. For 1,000 years, students scribbled his words in candlelit classrooms, sometimes agreeing, sometimes groaning, but always taking him seriously. Even when Renaissance scientists started poking holes in his theories, they did so by standing on the sturdy ladder he had built. Imagine every great thinker from Aquinas to Newton arguing with Aristotle across time like an endless group chat, complete with, "You're wrong, but thanks for the framework emojis." The fact that his ideas are still discussed today, whether in philosophy seminars or casual debates about virtue, proves just how deeply he wired himself into Western thought. Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher of his time, he became a permanent resident in the architecture of knowledge. Aristotle might have lived in ancient Greece, but his ideas still crash modern classrooms like an uninvited guest who never left. His logic became the foundation for computer algorithms, his ethics still show up in business seminars, and his musings on biology echo in labs full of microscopes. In a way, Aristotle was the Wi-Fi router of knowledge, broadcasting signals across centuries that students today still connect to, sometimes eagerly, sometimes while groaning before exams. He bridged the gap between Plato's lofty ideals and the modern scientific method, insisting that observation mattered just as much as abstract reasoning. Think of him as the middleman who linked myth and measurement, turning philosophy into something that could talk to physics, politics, and even Google search results. If Plato dreamed of perfect forms, Aristotle made sure we had practical instructions on how to categorize cats, run cities, and argue without losing friends. His ability to connect ancient thought with modern curiosity proves he wasn't just a thinker of his time. He was a thinker for all time, the original bridge between worlds of knowledge. Plato didn't just want to describe the world, he wanted to redesign it, starting with the mind. His famous theory of forms claimed that everything we see, chairs, trees, even sandwiches, are just blurry shadows of perfect versions floating in the realm of ideas. To explain it, he gave us the legendary allegory of the cave. Picture humans chained inside a dark cavern, staring at flickering shadows on the wall, thinking that's all reality has to offer. Then one brave thinker escapes, stumbles into the blinding sunlight, and realizes, wait, those were just shadows of the real deal. It's the ancient version of upgrading from VHS tapes to 4K. The story wasn't just philosophy, it was a wake-up call to question appearances, chase truth, and maybe squint a little less at shadows. Plato's cave continues to inspire everyone from philosophers to filmmakers, proving that a 2,400-year-old metaphor can still make us wonder whether we're living in reality or just binge-watching shadows on Netflix. Plato wasn't content with just writing clever dialogues. He wanted to redesign politics itself. In his work, The Republic, he argued that the best rulers shouldn't be warriors or wealthy nobles, but philosophers. Yes, the book basically says, wouldn't life be better if nerds ran the government? According to Plato, philosophers had the wisdom to see beyond illusions and chase the true good, unlike power-hungry politicians, who often treated cities like their personal chessboards. His idea of the philosopher king was radical. Imagine leaders who preferred debates over banquets and justice over jingling coins. Not everyone agreed, of course. Critics joked it was easier to find unicorns than rulers who actually loved wisdom more than wealth. Still, Plato's bold vision planted the seed that governance should be about knowledge and virtue, not just raw power. His mix of idealism and practicality made politics feel less like a Game of Thrones and more like a classroom experiment. And while we may still be waiting for philosopher kings to take office, the dream continues to spark debates every election season. Plato's legacy wasn't just a stack of dusty scrolls, it was a whole educational system. By founding the Academy of Athens, he basically invented the first university, centuries before anyone thought tuition fees could ruin your day. Students flocked to learn about ethics, politics, mathematics, and yes, those lofty ideas he kept talking about. His method wasn't memorization but dialogue, the ancient version of group chats where everyone debated until their brains hurt. The Academy trained generations of thinkers, including Aristotle, proving that Plato wasn't just a philosopher, he was also the ultimate teacher's teacher. His influence stretched far beyond Greece, shaping medieval thought, Renaissance art, and even modern classrooms where students still sigh at philosophy exams. Imagine Plato peeking into a 21st century lecture hall, laptops glowing, coffee cups everywhere, students half listening while scrolling social media, and yet his questions about truth, justice, and knowledge are still on the syllabus. That's the punchline. Plato may have lived in the 4th century BCE, but he's still on the faculty roster of human civilization. Socrates was the kind of philosopher who didn't need fancy robes, golden statues, or a reserved seat in the assembly. He wandered barefoot through Athens, looking more like a quirky neighbor than a sage. His life was simple, no wealth, no power, just endless conversations in the marketplace. And yet this man who owned almost nothing gave the world one of its richest ideas. I know that I know nothing. Far from being self-deprecating, it was his way of reminding everyone that wisdom begins with humility. Imagine him today, walking into a boardroom full of executives and casually saying, "So, what do you really know?" And suddenly the room goes silent. Socrates believed that asking questions was the key to uncovering truth, and he made a habit of poking at people's certainties until they wobbled. To some Athenians, he was an annoying gadfly. To others, he was a living conscience buzzing in their ears. Either way, his radical simplicity and honesty laid the foundation for philosophy itself, proving that sometimes the biggest revolution starts with admitting ignorance. Socrates didn't write books or lecture from ivory towers. He preferred conversations that felt more like verbal wrestling matches. His method, later called the Socratic method, was deceptively simple. Ask questions until people realized they didn't actually know what they thought they knew. It was like peeling an onion of certainty, layer after layer, until someone started crying. Whether the topic was justice, courage, or friendship, Socrates would gently prod with questions like, "But what do you mean by that? And can that always be true?" His friends found it enlightening. His critics found it maddening. To the powerful elites of Athens, he was less a philosopher and more a human glitch in their software, constantly exposing logical bugs. Yet this endless questioning planted the seeds of critical thinking, the foundation for philosophy, science, and even modern education. Today we'd call him the master of awkward but necessary conversations, the guy who never lets sloppy arguments slide. In short, Socrates turned questioning into an art form, and in doing so, he taught humanity how to think for itself. The end of Socrates' story reads like the world's most tragic courtroom drama with a twist of dark comedy. Accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, he was hauled into trial before an Athenian jury that was, let's say, not exactly impartial. Instead of begging for mercy, Socrates doubled down, delivering speeches that were half defense, half roast. When asked what punishment he deserved, he cheekily suggested free meals for life, like a hero's pension at the city's expense. Unsurprisingly, the jury wasn't amused. Sentenced to death, he calmly accepted his fate, drinking a cup of hemlock as if it were just bad-tasting herbal tea. Surrounded by grieving students, he kept his humor and composure to the end, proving his philosophy wasn't just words, it was a way of life, even in the face of death. The trial and death of Socrates became legendary, turning him into philosophy's first martyr, a man who refused to compromise truth even when it cost him everything. Johann Sebastian Bach's life was anything but glamorous. Forget champagne and royal courts. His career was built in the echoing halls of churches, surrounded by choirs, dusty hymnals, and the occasional squeaky organ pedal. Born into a family of musicians, Bach practically had music in his blood. He served as an organist and composer for churches across Germany, where his job description was equal parts writing divine music and keeping choirs from singing off-key. His daily routine wasn't filled with fame, but with discipline, composing intricate fugues like brain-twisting puzzles, teaching students who probably thought he was too strict, and raising a small orchestra of children, 20 to be exact. Yet out of this humble church-bound life came music so grand it felt like it could touch the heavens. For Bach, composing wasn't about showing off, it was about reaching for the divine through sound. His story proves that sometimes genius doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a sturdy organ bench, a quill, and a mind that hears the universe singing. If Bach's life seemed quiet, his music was anything but. The Brandenburg concertos burst with so much energy, they sound like a Baroque jam session where every instrument fights for the spotlight. Each concerto is like a musical roller coaster, strings darting, harpsichords sprinting, trumpets blasting as if they had too much coffee. Then there's the monumental Mass in B minor, a piece so grand it feels less like church music and more like the soundtrack to creation itself. It's dense, majestic, and layered, like an orchestral lasagna baked with divine precision. These works weren't just entertainment, they were architecture and sound, carefully crafted to balance emotion, intellect, and spirituality. Bach had the uncanny ability to weave complexity and clarity together, making music that mathematicians, priests, and ordinary listeners could all swoon over. Whether in intimate chamber settings or massive cathedral halls, his compositions stretch human imagination toward the infinite. In short, Bach didn't just write notes. He built universes where every instrument had a voice, and the cosmos itself seemed to hum along. Bach may have passed away in 1750, but his music refused to pack up and leave. Instead, it became the secret fuel for the geniuses who followed. Mozart once joked that studying Bach was like learning from the father of music itself, while Beethoven declared, "He is not a stream, but an ocean." Talk about rave reviews. Centuries later, his fugues and chorales still sneak into movie scores, jazz improvisations, and even electronic remixes. What made Bach's legacy so unstoppable was his ability to balance mathematical precision with emotional depth, music that made both scholars and ordinary listeners feel they were brushing against eternity. Imagine him as the cosmic DJ of the Baroque, spinning themes that future composers kept remixing into symphonies, sonatas, and beyond. His notes became the DNA of Western music, woven into everything from symphony halls to Spotify playlists. In short, Bach didn't just influence the future, he became the invisible hand guiding it, a composer whose echoes still reverberate every time a musician dares to chase beauty and order in sound. Mozart didn't just arrive on the music scene, he practically crash-landed with a harpsichord under his arm. By the age of 5, he was already composing little minuets, and by 6, he was dazzling Europe's royal courts with performances that left dukes, duchesses, and emperors blinking in disbelief. Picture a tiny boy in powdered wig and lace cuffs, playing with more confidence than half the adults in the room, then politely bowing before launching into an improvisation that no one saw coming. His father, Leopold, acted as tour manager, dragging young Wolfgang across Europe like the original child prodigy rock star on tour. Audiences gawked at this pint-sized virtuoso who could switch from violin to keyboard without missing a beat, while the aristocracy whispered, "Is this boy even human?" Mozart turned concert halls into playgrounds, leaving both nobles and commoners stunned. His early fame wasn't just a fluke. It was the opening act of a genius whose music would later redefine what it meant to compose with both brilliance and joy. Mozart didn't just compose music, he staged emotional roller coasters that made audiences laugh, cry, and gasp in the same evening. Take Don Giovanni, part opera, part dark comedy, part cautionary tale about what happens when you mix too much charm with too little morality. Then there's the Magic Flute, where fairy tale adventures meet dazzling arias. Think of it as a Baroque Disney movie with extra high notes. And who could forget the haunting Requiem, a masterpiece left unfinished at his death, wrapped in mystery and drama worthy of a Netflix series. These weren't just works, they were worlds, meticulously crafted with wit, drama, and heart. Mozart had the uncanny ability to balance technical brilliance with human emotion, weaving melodies that stuck in your head long after the curtain closed. His compositions proved that music wasn't only for the elite, it could speak to everyone, from kings to commoners, in a universal language of joy and sorrow. In short, his works didn't just entertain, they defined what timeless art sounds like. Mozart's life burned fast and bright, like a comet streaking across the night sky. He composed over 600 works in just 35 years, a pace that makes modern musicians look like they're on vacation. His life wasn't always easy. Money troubles, fickle patrons, and a workload that could bury 3 composers. But he poured every ounce of his genius into music. When he died young in 1791, buried in a modest grave with little ceremony, it seemed a cruel ending for someone who had given the world so much beauty. And yet his melodies never died. From concert halls to movie soundtracks, from wedding marches to lullabies, Mozart's music continues to echo, playful one moment, profound the next. His short life reminds us that immortality doesn't come from living long, but from leaving something unforgettable behind. In a way, Mozart still conducts from the beyond. Every note he wrote a spark that refuses to fade, keeping him alive in the hearts of listeners centuries later. Ludwig van Beethoven's life wasn't a fairy tale. It was closer to a heavyweight boxing match with destiny. Born into a turbulent family, with a father who tried to mold him into a child prodigy by force, think stage dad with zero patience, Beethoven grew up battling hardship from the start. Poverty, illness, and social struggles shadowed his early years. But he had one weapon that refused to be silenced: music. By his 20s, he was already making waves in Vienna, with fiery piano performances that left audiences gasping, as if the piano itself were both his battlefield and his ally. Yet even as success grew, the cruel twist came: his hearing began to fade. Imagine a composer whose world revolves around sound, now betrayed by silence creeping in. Instead of surrendering, Beethoven clenched his fists at fate, famously declaring he would seize destiny by the throat. His life story is not just about notes on a staff, but about resilience, proof that genius can turn suffering into symphonies that thunder across centuries. When Beethoven sat down to write his symphonies, he wasn't just composing music, he was staging battles, triumphs, and revolutions in sound. His Symphony No. 3, the Eroica, was so bold that audiences at the time didn't know whether to applaud or panic. Symphony No. 5, with its famous da-da-da-dum, became the ultimate ringtone of destiny knocking at the door. And Symphony No. 9, complete with the Ode to Joy, practically reinvented the concept of human unity. An anthem so powerful, it's now the soundtrack for everything from peace rallies to flash mobs. These weren't just pretty melodies, they were declarations. Thunderclaps that shook the walls of concert halls and the minds of listeners. Beethoven took the classical form, stretched it, broke it, and rebuilt it into something monumental. His symphonies didn't just raise the bar for music, they raised the ceiling, the walls and the floor. If Mozart was the genius of effortless grace, Beethoven was the genius of defiant power, and his symphonies remain some of the loudest love letters ever written to the human spirit. Beethoven's story is less about tragedy and more about defiance, an artist who stared silence in the face and refused to blink. By the time his deafness was nearly complete, most people would have retired, but Beethoven doubled down, composing works that thundered with life even if he could no longer hear them. Imagine scribbling furious notes on a staff, not knowing exactly how they sounded, yet confident enough to unleash masterpieces like the late quartets and the Ninth Symphony. His very existence became a rallying cry. That human spirit is louder than fate itself. Even today, his image, wild hair, piercing eyes, and a scowl fit to scare destiny, stands as a symbol of resilience. Beethoven didn't just overcome adversity, he wrestled with it, pinned it down, and turned it into music that still shakes concert halls. His life reminds us that genius is not defined by comfort, but by the refusal to give up. In the end, Beethoven wasn't just a composer. He became the soundtrack of human perseverance. From Da Vinci's flying machines to Einstein's space-time puzzles, from Curie's glowing discoveries to Beethoven's thunderous symphonies, the legacies of these 15 geniuses form a patchwork quilt of human brilliance. They lived in different centuries, spoke different languages, and fought different battles, yet all shared one trait: the refusal to accept limits. Their inventions, philosophies, and art didn't just stay in books or concert halls. They seeped into how we live, love, and imagine today. Without them, our world might still be scribbling on cave walls, squinting at the stars without telescopes, or tapping our feet to very boring tunes. But thanks to their audacity, knowledge feels infinite, art feels timeless, and progress feels possible. Their stories remind us that genius is not about perfection, but about daring to see what others overlook. Together, they didn't just write history. They gave us the tools to dream bigger, to argue louder, to build higher, and to laugh at the impossible until it becomes reality. If there's one lesson from this gallery of geniuses, it's that knowledge, art, and creativity aren't just luxuries. They're survival tools. Every breakthrough, from Newton's apple to Tesla's lightning bolts, from Curie's glowing vials to Bach's fugues, showed that human progress thrives on curiosity and imagination. These people didn't accept the world as it was. They poked, questioned, and sometimes outright annoyed it until it revealed something new. Their works remind us that science and art are not enemies, but partners in pushing humanity forward. Knowledge gives us the how, art gives us the why, and creativity gives us the courage to try anyway. Together, they form a triangle of power that no empire, economy, or obstacle can easily crush. The message is clear. As long as we keep asking questions, painting ideas, and composing futures, we'll never run out of paths to explore. Genius is not about being born extraordinary. It's about daring to use our minds as weapons of wonder. What ties all these stories together is one final truth. The world has always needed people bold enough to be different. Geniuses aren't born to blend in. They're born to disrupt the party. From Galileo defying the church to Curie breaking barriers of gender, from Beethoven shaking fists at fate to Darwin challenging humanity's self-image, each proved that progress belongs to the stubborn dreamers. The world may roll its eyes, laugh, or even punish them at first, but history eventually kneels at their feet. Difference is not a flaw. It's the ignition spark of change. Without those who dare to zig when everyone else zags, we'd still be stuck staring at the same old horizons. The message is cheeky but serious. Embrace your quirks, defend your wild ideas, and don't fear standing alone. Because every so-called misfit might just be the next Mozart, the next Einstein, or the next spark that lights up humanity's path. And so the curtain closes, but not really, because the next genius isn't trapped in a dusty history book. They might be sipping coffee at the cafe down the street, doodling in a school notebook, or tinkering with code in a garage. Genius has never been about crowns or titles. It's about curiosity, courage, and the guts to break patterns. History's great minds prove that the extraordinary often hides in the ordinary. Maybe the next Mozart is practicing guitar on YouTube, the next Curie is staring at a glowing science kit, or the next Einstein is daydreaming during math class. The future isn't waiting for a hero in a cape. It's waiting for someone bold enough to ask the weird question nobody else thought of. So as we step out of this journey, remember, genius is not a relic of the past. It's a living force. And the next chapter of brilliance could already be unfolding around us, or even inside you.